I am so glad to be back here at the National Space Club Florida Committee. It has been many years since I have come here for one of their luncheons. We are going to be hearing from Colonel Meredith Beg, and she's going to be talking about the 45th Space Wing, 45th Launch Delta, which is the busiest in the world because the spaceports here in Florida are the busiest in the world. We had 94 launches that the Eastern Range handled last year, and it's going to be more than 100, I'm predicting, here in 2025. It has been several years since the range has been trying to streamline operations to increase the number of launches that it can have in a period of time, to have that quick turnaround, to focus on the multiple users, the multiple launch pads, and who gets priority, and how do you have that quick, rapid succession of launches that we expect to see from SpaceX, and hopefully make room for some others as well. We've got, of course, New Glenn still on the pad. We have Vulcan, and we have some smaller players who are launching or plan to launch out of the Cape.
His focus was the drive to 48. Well, we drove by 48 and left it in the rear view mirror. It's been a pretty spectacular year. We were targeting 100, missed it just that much. We were so darn close. Also, last year we only launched 4 National Security Space. This year we're targeting 11. Again, delivering those critical capabilities on orbit, maintain our superiority not only in space but to and from space as well.
That's a wrap on the first National Space Club Florida Committee luncheon for the year. So what we got to talk about today was the ways in which the Eastern Range, the 45th Space Wing, are expanding and improving. And one thing that Colonel Beck said over and over and over again was that they're looking at ways that they can increase efficiency. Because one of the problems is that the growth has been so much over such a long period of time that she kept using phrases like duct tape and chewing gum and wire. And her goal is to ensure that it is sustainable over time, that it can keep expanding. There was 93 launches last year out of the Eastern Range, out of Florida, and how many this year? Certainly over 100. They've got a number they're aiming for. And she wants to make sure that it's sustainable from, not just a technological point of view, but a human point of view. So she talked about the various people who maybe need to increase safety. Like if we get too frequent launches, maybe they need ear protection. Just thinking ahead to the physical, mental, and spiritual health of the people that are under her, which I love that emphasis on the people. She also talked about how everything seems smooth. On the outside it's like ducks swimming on a pond, on a lake, and then underneath they're like going like this, they're going crazy, right? And that is not sustainable. So she's looking at ways in which things need to improve, efficiencies need to be brought in, operations need to change to make it so that it's not so much of a crazy swim underneath the water, that it's nice and smooth as the launch cadence and launch rates increase over time, which according to her slide, they're expecting to happen at least over the next 5 years. I can't see a time when launches would decrease, except for when SpaceX Starship starts replacing the Falcon 9s that we see flying so frequently. Another thing she talked about was resiliency, and this is resiliency against problems like she brought up a hurricane, power outages due to hurricanes, and how quickly we can recover from those kinds of natural disasters. But then she also talked about threats and what happens if there's a bad actor who does something, who tries to take out a launch, who tries to cut power, who does something, and how do we be resilient against those kinds of threats, both natural and adversarial. And so there's a lot that she is covering here. There's a lot that the 45th Space Wing actually takes care of that I think a lot of us just don't appreciate. We hear the weather, the weather squadron, right? But we don't always hear about all the other things that are happening behind the scenes to ensure that all these launches that we cheer on go so well. And she talked about how these launches are very visible, they're very global. Anybody around the world can see when one of these launches are happening, and therefore they are a turn. They're also a sense of pride associated with them. And in fact, that is one of the reasons why I live here, right? Why I moved back is to see these launches that we are just so all excited about, plus the things that go on them. So there was a focus on the, what did she call it? The spaceport of the future, I think is the phrase. So how do we transform and modernize a lot of the equipment and processes that have been around since like the 50s, the 60s, like even the 40s, I think, around here. Some of these things just have been around for so long. The infrastructure, the equipment, how do we modernize it? How do we bring it to the future so that we can continue to perform so very well here at the Cape? I, for one, am looking forward to seeing how the Cape continues to respond. I remember back in the day when Space Shuttle retired in 2011, and then things just died. There was such a decline in activity here. People were being laid off, people were moving away, taking other jobs, even moving out of industry. And so this area has recovered so much over the past 12 years. So it's been incredible to see this growth and to see it grow every year to year. And of course, a lot of that does have to do with SpaceX, but there are other players as well. And we will continue to see that multi-user approach continue from the Cape and from elsewhere each and every year. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this area turns into. What will Cape Canaveral Spaceport turn into in the future that will continue to make our nation proud? One thing that Colonel Beg talked about was the fact that this past year, for the first time, the range was able to collect user fees, in a sense, from the users of the pad, that is the launch providers. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year of 2024 put into the legislation an authorization, an authority for the Space Force to reimburse some of its expenses by asking the commercial companies to pay them back, by collecting fees from these commercial companies in a similar way that a port authority collects fees from its users. And that's how the range wants to be seen, both on the East Coast and on the West Coast. They want to be seen almost as a port authority that is recuperating costs. So when we're talking about how is the Eastern Range, how is the 45th Delta going to continue to expand sustainably? Well, it needs to do so by getting more money. And it can't always rely on the federal government to give it the money that it needs. And therefore, it needs to start relying on collecting costs from the users who are using the infrastructure and the personnel and the weather predictions and anything else that goes into launching rockets from the East Coast and the West Coast. I know there was pushback from users whenever you've been getting something for free and then suddenly someone tells you need to start paying some of it. Well, of course there's pushback. And there was some concern that some of the smaller launch service providers would not be able to afford to launch if there were increased fees. But I think this was truly targeted at the user that has been launching the most, which certainly can afford it, and that would be SpaceX. This had such little fanfare when it went into place that I can't even find a news article from the past year that indicated when the Space Force started charging these fees. She said it was towards the end of the fiscal year. She set a date, and I don't remember when it was, but it's happening. And these companies are still launching. SpaceX is still increasing its cadence. Nobody is stopping launches because the Space Force is now collecting these user fees. I'm excited to be back in the area. I attended these lunches every month, plus the special events that they have throughout the year, the holiday party in December at Fish Lips, and there's an award ceremony coming up at Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. Feel free to go to the website. You can get more information.